Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really fascinating source material today. We're basically charting the biggest systemic screw-ups that force the European Union to completely rethink how it works. We're giving you the fast track to understanding where the EU's deepest vulnerabilities really lie.
Yeah, we're diving into 5 landmark crises. Think 1999 right through to Qatargate just recently. These weren't small incidents. We're talking hundreds of billions of euros lost, political power fundamentally shifting, and Brussels being forced, really, to write completely new laws.
Exactly. This isn't just some dusty history lesson. It's the story of how the EU learns, often the hard way.
And when we say biggest, it's not just about the cash, is it? Our sources looked at 4 things together. The actual financial magnitude, yes, but also the political fallout, the societal harm, the real impact on people, and, crucially, the legislative impact.
Right. If a failure didn't force a major new law or a whole new institution, it didn't make this list.
So these 5 cases, they're like different types of failure, almost archetypes. You've got the Santer Commission collapse in '99, that's institutional mismanagement. Then Cum-Ex, pure criminal tax fraud.
Followed by LuxLeaks, that's state-sanctioned tax avoidance, bit different. Then the huge corporate deceit of Dieselgate, and finally Qatargate in 2022, which was raw political corruption.
It's quite a tour, isn't it? A tour through the EU's biggest learning moments. And we should start with that political earthquake back in 1999. Many younger listeners probably haven't heard much about it, but it totally reshaped the power balance between the Parliament and the Commission.
Okay, let's dive into that first crisis. Institutional integrity, 1999, the Santer Commission. I mean, this is unprecedented. For the first and only time ever, the entire 20-member European Commission resigned. Together, en masse. That's failure on a grand scale.
And what's really interesting looking back is that the main driver wasn't necessarily, individuals lining their pockets with massive bribes or anything like that. It was more a deep crisis of institutional culture. The allegations were about mismanagement, nepotism, sure, but also a fundamental loss of political control over the bureaucracy.
The official report actually said some departments were acting like a state within a state. They were just running themselves.
Which highlights a key point, doesn't it? Large bureaucracies, if they aren't genuinely checked from the outside, tend to build walls of opacity to protect themselves. This was less about simple theft and more about how big, complex institutions can become dangerously insulated.
And that insulation bred, well, arrogance. The sources talk about a disdainful attitude towards the European Parliament. They seem to think they didn't really need to answer to the MEPs. That turned out to be a huge mistake.
A catastrophic miscalculation, really. Because the spark came from a whistleblower, a Dutch official named Paul van Buitenen. He went straight to the Parliament, detailing all this mismanagement. And when the Commission suspended him for it...
Oh, that just lit a fire under the Parliament, didn't it? It went from being about administration to a full-blown constitutional fight. Power struggle 101.
Exactly. The Parliament refused to grant the Commission discharge for the budget. And for you listening, that's basically the Parliament saying, we don't trust how you're handling the money.
Then this committee of independent experts came in and concluded the Commission had, quote, lost political control. They faced a motion of censure and boom, they had to quit.
The fallout was massive, politically and in terms of new laws. It led directly to creating OLAF, the European Anti-Fraud Office. The whole point was that it needed to be independent because the Commission's own internal anti-fraud unit had clearly failed.
But was OLAF actually effective from day one? Or did the Commission, try to keep it on a tight leash initially?
Oh, there was definitely resistance at first, but the principle was established. More fundamentally, though, this crisis set a permanent new standard. The Commission serves at the pleasure of the Parliament. It proved the Parliament wasn't just a talking shop anymore. It had teeth and wasn't afraid to use them.
Okay, so Santer was about institutional rot. Let's shift gears now to rot driven by pure staggering greed. We're talking multi-billion euro schemes targeting national treasuries. And it's interesting to contrast the outright criminal theft with the more, let's say, legally dubious state-sanctioned stuff.
Right, got to start with the Cum-Ex Files. It's often called the biggest tax theft in European history, and honestly, that's probably accurate. The scale is just mind-boggling. Estimates range from, 55 billion up to maybe 150 billion, stolen directly from taxpayers in Germany, France, Denmark, Italy.
Okay, let's try and break down Cum-Ex simply, because the name itself is a bit weird. Cum-Ex means without. It's all about trading shares right around the dividend payment date. The core trick was to make it look like multiple people owned the same shares at the exact moment the dividend tax was supposed to be paid.
Yeah, creating deliberate ambiguity. So multiple parties, sometimes 2, 3, even more, could then claim a tax refund. But here's the kicker. The tax they were getting refunded was only ever paid once, or sometimes never paid at all.
So hang on, let me get this straight for everyone listening. They are essentially running a super complex magic trick, tricking the tax office into thinking, say, 3 different investors had paid tax on the same dividend.
Exactly.
So all 3 could claim a refund, even though the taxman only got the money once, if at all.
Precisely. And this wasn't just a couple of dodgy traders in a basement. This was huge. Orchestrated by major investment banks, hedge funds, top-tier law firms. I mean, a partner from Freshfields, a really prestigious firm, actually went to prison over this.
Wow. And the fundamental weakness that allowed this. The sources seem clear. National tax authorities just couldn't keep up. They were fragmented, while the financial market was completely integrated across Europe. Money zipped around instantly, but the cops, the tax inspectors, were stuck at the border.
That exact structural problem leads us perfectly into the second case here. LuxLeaks from 2014. Now, this wasn't illegal theft in the same way Cum-Ex was criminal fraud. This was state-sanctioned tax avoidance, using legal loopholes, basically, blessed by a government.
Right. Luxembourg, the country, was using these secret deals called advanced tax rulings, ATRs. They basically pre-approved complex schemes cooked up by the big accounting firms. PwC was heavily involved here for over 340 multinational giants, Amazon, IKEA, Pepsi, you name it.
And the result? These huge companies funneled billions in profits through Luxembourg, but thanks to these secret deals, they paid effective tax rates sometimes as low as like 0.25%, a quarter of 1%.
Meanwhile, other EU countries were losing out massively. The estimates are what, 50 to 70 billion a year in lost tax revenue?
Annually, yeah. Just staggering sums being legally diverted. The political timing was also awkward. Jean-Claude Juncker, who'd been Luxembourg prime minister while this system thrived, had just become president of the European Commission.
Yeah, that didn't look good. But the reaction, the legislative hammer that came down after LuxLeaks, that was critical.
Absolutely. LuxLeaks basically forced the EU's hand. It led straight to the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, ATAD, and maybe even more importantly, it forced countries to automatically share information about these tax rulings with each other. That system, called DAC3, effectively ended the era of total secrecy that LuxLeaks depended on.
So looking at both Cum-Ex and LuxLeaks, there's this common thread, isn't there? It's the weaponization of complexity, making things deliberately complicated and opaque, using the law itself to shield activity, whether it's outright criminal or just incredibly aggressive tax avoidance.
That's a perfect summary. Complexity wasn't a bug, it was the feature, designed to paralyze oversight and provide that fig leaf of legality.
Okay, let's move from financial engineering to something with a much more direct, tangible human cost. Dieselgate, 2015. Corporate deceit on an industrial scale with devastating consequences.
Yeah, Volkswagen, Europe's biggest car maker, they admitted putting defeat devices in 11 million diesel cars worldwide. This software was clever. It knew when it was in a lab being tested. Under those static conditions, it turned on the emissions controls, passed the test.
And then as soon as the car was actually driving on the road,
it switched the controls off to improve performance and fuel economy, supposedly. But the pollution impact was catastrophic. Some tests showed cars emitting up to 40 times the legal limit of nitrogen oxides, NOx, in real-world driving.
40 times. And the societal harm?
Yeah.
It's just horrific when you see the numbers.
The sources connect that excess NOx pollution directly to an estimated 124,000 premature deaths across the EU and the UK. And the associated health costs, plus lost productivity, it's estimated at 760 billion.
Wait, say that again, 760 billion euros?
Billion. With a B. That number really reframes this, doesn't it? It's not just a corporate fine issue, it's a massive public health disaster caused by deliberate fraud.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that scale.
Okay.
So the big question is, why didn't EU regulators catch this? How did VW get away with it for so long?
Textbook regulatory capture, that's the term the sources use. The fraud wasn't uncovered by European regulators like the German KBA, the type approval authority there. Why? Because often these national authorities were just too close to their own giant domestic car manufacturers.
They were captured by the industry they were supposed to be policing.
Pretty much. It was actually independent scientists working with the ICCT and, crucially, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, who blew the whistle. The EU's old system, where car makers could basically choose which national authority approved their cars for the whole EU market, created this race to the bottom.
No.
Manufacturers could shop around for the easiest regulator.
So the failure was baked into the system itself, which meant the fix had to be systemic too.
Absolutely. The EU had to completely overhaul car testing. They threw out the easily game lab tests and brought in mandatory real driving emissions testing, RDE, testing cars on actual roads. And crucially, the new rules gave the European Commission itself the power to do independent checks and fine companies directly up to €30,000 per non-compliant car. That broke the stranglehold of those captured national agencies.
Okay, that takes us to the most recent major crisis, Qatargate, erupting in 2022. This one felt different. Raw political corruption, cash changing hands, targeting the European Parliament, the EU's only directly elected body, the place that's supposed to represent democratic integrity.
Yeah, the details were just so brazen. You had Belgian police conducting coordinated raids, finding over 1.5 million in cash, literally stuffed in suitcases and bags, leading to the arrest of really high-profile figures, a sitting vice president of the parliament, Eva Kaili, a former MEP, Pier Antonio Panzeri.
And the goal of all this alleged bribery, it seems shockingly straightforward. This network was apparently selling influence to foreign governments. Qatar and Morocco were named, trying to get favorable decisions, like visa-free travel for Qatar or trying to kill resolutions criticizing their human rights records.
And Qatargate ripped the lid off what some sources called a culture of impunity within the parliament. The systems meant to prevent this just weren't working. You had weak rules on conflicts of interest, no mandatory registration or disclosure from any lobbyists, and the parliament's own ethics body. Well, it was essentially toothless.
A paper tiger, I think, was the phrase used.
Exactly. It was self-policing, but it didn't even have the power to start its own investigations. If nobody complained formally, nothing happened. It was completely inadequate for dealing with serious influence peddling.
Okay, so we've walked through 5 huge crises. Santer's institutional collapse, Cum-Ex and LuxLeaks financial scandals, Dieselgate's corporate deceit, Qatargate's corruption. Let's try to synthesize this now. Looking across all these different types of failure, what are the recurring patterns? What makes the EU systemically vulnerable?
Well, looking at the analysis across the sources, 4 big themes keep coming up. They seem to define these failures, whether they happened in the Commission, the Parliament, or the markets.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is regulatory arbitrage and capture. We saw this clearly, right? Exploiting the gap between the single market where money and goods flow freely and the fragmented national oversight. Cum-Ex traders played German rules against Danish rules. Dieselgate let VW get approval from a lenient German authority that was valid everywhere. LuxLeaks relied on Luxembourg's rules, undermining others. National authorities were either outgunned or too cozy with those they regulated.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Second, the weaponization of complexity. We touched on this with Cum-Ex and LuxLeaks especially. Complexity wasn't an accident. It was a tool, used deliberately to create opacity, to confuse and paralyze national watchdogs, and to give a kind of fake legal cover to activities that were incredibly harmful.
Okay, complexity as a weapon, got it. Third pattern.
Now this one is really striking, the power of external scrutiny. Think about it. None of these 5 massive crises were initially uncovered by the EU's own internal controls or auditors. Santer needed a whistleblower. LuxLeaks needed investigative journalists. Dieselgate needed US regulators and independent scientists. Qatargate needed the Belgian police acting on intelligence. It consistently highlights a weakness in the EU's own internal checks and balances.
That's a really crucial point. The alarm bells almost always came from outside the Brussels bubble. And the final pattern.
The final, perhaps most defining pattern, is the cycle of scandal-driven reform. Look at the big fixes. OLAF after Santer, the ATAD tax laws after LuxLeaks, RDE testing after Dieselgate, the current push for a stronger ethics body after Qatargate. Progress, major institutional change in the EU, seems overwhelmingly reactive. It's forged in the fire of public scandal, not proactively built.
So, pulling it all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, today? The EU definitely has more safeguards now than in 1999, right? Things like the European Public Prosecutor's Office, EPO, stronger transparency rules.
Unquestionably, it's better protected. But the analysis suggests key vulnerabilities persist, mainly because the underlying political resistance to deeper integration or stronger central oversight hasn't vanished.
And those remaining gaps are significant. The sources point to harmful tax competition, the core issue behind LexLeaks still existing. Member states still drag their feet on full tax cooperation sometimes.
And perhaps most critically, there's still significant political pushback against creating a truly powerful, genuinely independent, cross-institutional EU ethics body. The Parliament wants something tougher after Targate, something not based on self-policing. But getting the Commission, and especially the Council, representing the member states, fully on board, well, that remains a slow, difficult process.
So the sources really framed the European project as this ongoing, unfinished battle against these kinds of systemic threats, which leaves us and you with a final thought to chew on. Can the EU finally break this reactive cycle? Can it build the institutional resilience it needs before the next big scandal hits? Or is crisis, is failure, destined to remain the main engine of European progress?